If there is a game developer and publisher that I miss having around, it's Midway. While I didn't grow up playing their games in the arcades, or rather what's not their IP, what did help me experience them were the arcade compilations known as Midway Arcade Treasures, primarily the first 2 installments on PlayStation 2. Otherwise, delivering a couple of my favorite series from Gauntlet to even Mortal Kombat, the latter of which still going to this day. Still, I can't help but feel like WB isn't using any IP that isn't Mortal Kombat properly, to the point where the only few re-releases they ever bothered were so few and far between. One of those re-releases in question is Midway Arcade Origins, a Gen 7 compilation of Midway games not named Mortal Kombat. How does this compilation fare? Let's find out. But to start, I'm going to go over these in pseudo-alphabetical order. The first is 720 Degrees, which is perhaps the oldest skateboarding game I have played so far, long before the era of Tony Hawk. The arcade cab was built to somewhat emulate a skate experience, at least according to design, as I never played one of said cabinets. Anyway, the goal of the game is you're to skate around a somewhat open park, collecting points for tickets at the next skate challenge, to money for upgrades. But time runs out and you get swarmed by a bunch of bees or hornets. Playing it on any console, either Xbox or PS2, is a bit rough just for how the controls transition. But if you like the Tony Hawk games or EA's Skate series, you might want to take a look for history's sake. ABP, short for All Points Bulletin, is a driving game where you're a cop arresting criminals on the road in high-speed chases. Sort of fun, but once again, the issue is the controls. And I have a feeling you're all gonna see a theme this review. Arch Rivals is an arcade basketball game, but instead of real-life teams, there are fictional ones, and is done in a very cartoony way. You even got some rule breaking in there, as rival basketball players appear to punch each other to get the ball from one's possession. Honestly, it's pretty good, as it feels like NBA Jam before there was an NBA Jam, just missing some flaming hoops, broken glass, and that certain catchphrase. Bubbles, where you must control, well, a bubble, to inflate well enough from scum and small bugs before you can flow down the drain, all the while avoiding bigger obstacles like big bugs and brushes. A simple but another decent game in this collection, no complaints as far as controls go. Now we talk about the 2 sprint games. Championship Sprint is alphabetically the first on the list, but the base game overall is Super Sprint, both releasing in 1986. Both are top-down racing games in where you must race in various Formula 1 inspired tracks, each game having their own set of levels. It takes some time to get used to the top-down style, especially when you see the whole track, but again, my biggest gripe are the controls. Clearly not translating well from the arcade version, even just looking at the design of the cabinet. Defender 1 and Defender 2 are side-scrolling shooters, in where you must defend Earth from invaders, in addition, save civilians from whenever they are abducted. Besides the sequel adding some new obstacles and enemies, the 2 are more or less similar games, and while they can be fun, can get a little boring after a while. Gauntlet 1 and Gauntlet 2 are my favorite games on these Midway arcade collections, because they are the starters of my favorite Gauntlet games overall. And they are simple, but in the case of the arcade classics, very quarter-hungry dungeon crawlers. Picking a class, and in 2's case, picking a color. You must go through various dungeons, slaughtering everything in your path. For its time, it's amazing how many dungeons could fit in these old cabinets. These are 2 of the better controlling games on this collection, and if you play free play mode, you can spam how many quarters to continue playing even as you run out of health. If you love not just the latter Gauntlet games I mentioned, but maybe something like Diablo or games inspired by that, they are worth checking out at least once. Joust 1 and Joust 2 are some sort of platform arena games inspired by the medieval sport involving horses, but instead involving mythical creatures. Here you have to face off multiple enemies over a volcanic pit and try and collect dropping items like eggs. I don't know, I've never been the biggest fan of Joust. It just feels clunky to me in places and slippery in others. Maybe it's the emulation? Marble Madness, created by Mark Cerny of modern PlayStation fame, is a game where you play a marble going through all sorts of deadly obstacles. This one in particular is tough as nails, and the controls take some time to get used to, but it's worth playing if you want to see where Cerny got his career started, and if you're a fan of other marble games like, say, Super Monkey Ball. By the way, the new Monkey Ball game is awesome so far. Go support it and tell Sega we need more than Sonic and Yakuza. Oh, getting off topic here. Sorry. Pit Fighter is a brawler in more open arenas with digitized actors before Midway's own Mortal Kombat, involving items to pick up. Think like Power Stone before Power Stone, or in my case it's clones like One Piece Grand Battle. Fun fact, another Power Stone-like was published by Midway too, based on the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Despite all that, the game, I hate to say, isn't that good. The fighting is just stiff, same as the controls themselves. All the more baffling that it was decided to leave Mortal Kombat out for its own collection. Rampage, inspired by kaiju tokusatsu monster movies, notably Godzilla and King Kong, in where up to 3 players team up to tear up various US cities as monsters. To survive, the monsters must eat humans to regain health. Though of course, there's the ability to add more coin in this collection as well every time the monster runs out of health. It's as mindless as it gets, but it's pretty fun. Rampart is a medieval-themed hybrid of action and strategy, in where you must station a castle and defend it from enemies at sea. After the attacks, it gets a bit like a puzzle where you must figure out under a set time on how to get your castle back in order before time runs out. It's one of those few trackball games that doesn't play too bad on the regular controller, but I always tend to struggle with strategy games despite me still playing them. Decent otherwise. Robotron 2084 is perhaps the earliest example of a twin-stick shooter, in where you use 2 sticks, one to move, the other to shoot in various directions, while saving innocent civilians under attack. It works pretty well, but if you have a history of epilepsy, I advise to be careful because it flashes a lot. Root Beer Tapper, which is basically a censored version of the game Tapper, is a title where you're a sole bartender trying to serve rows of customers by serving them root beer, all the while trying to keep things in order by collecting empty glasses and tips. The only 2 methods of failure are if a glass fails or the customers are that impatient. As far as the gameplay goes, it's simple, it works, but despite its over-the-top nature, it does capture the feeling of pressure in working under customer service. Good God, does it ever! Satan's Hollow is a spaceship shooter very reminiscent of Space Invaders or Namco's Galaga or Galaxian, but instead of space, it's horror-themed, with an exception of an additional objective on collecting bridge pieces. Not much to say about this one, really. Sinistar is a top-down spaceship shooter, similar to Asteroids, but with horror elements, on where you must fight and gather resources to use the right bombs to face the evil Sinistar. I was never able to do this in time, but hey, another decent game in this collection. A really good one here is Smash TV. Like Robotron, is a twin-stick shooter, set in a dystopian-themed game show, similar to the Arnold Schwarzenegger film, The Running Man. Also very loosely on a Stephen King book, though he disowns the movie. Anyway, you shoot, pick up power-ups and prizes, and survive very challenging levels. All there is to it. However, I did notice some sound issues with this title. Like one time, I played this mute before resetting. I don't think I ever experienced this in Midway Arcade Treasures on PS2 either. Spy Hunter 1 and Spy Hunter 2. 2 similar games but with different perspectives. One is a top-down action driving game, the other is an attempt to emulate a 3D driving game. Needless to say, the former is a better title, as the latter was way too ahead of its time for its own good. At least Midway did have one solidly received attempt to make it in true 3D in Gen 6, but even then, you might find better in James Bond titles, even if there are only a few levels. Tubin, a top-down racing game set on a river. It's not great to control on consoles. Total Carnage, the last twin-stick shooter on this collection. This time taking after a war-themed action movies, like Rambo Post First Blood, whose villain is a dictator with the most offensive name. I am not gonna say it. Anyway, a fun game just like its predecessor Smash TV was. Not much to say. Tournament Cyberball 2072. American football, but with robots. Though more arcade-friendly, you definitely need basic knowledge of American football to get the most enjoyment out of this one, says a guy who likes NFL Blitz, but anyway. Vindicators Part 2, a game that's actually not on Midway Arcade Treasures, unlike its predecessor, is a top-down shooter where you play as a tank. Somehow I find the game plays pretty fine on the D-pad without the needed extra controls. Pretty good game though. Wizard of War, a top-down shooter with Pac-Man-like mazes. Not much to say about this title either, other than it's another fun title here. Xenophobe is a side-scrolling shooter that is basically Star Trek meets Alien. or Aliens, in where you explore a ship to purge an alien menace. All there is, really. Except the controls are kind of weird for some functions, like ducking. And last but not least, Zybots, by Gauntlet creator Ed Log. In my gaming life, this is the earliest example of a third-person shooter so far. And despite its own out-of-date weirdness with the controls, I find it somehow aged pretty well in a way. Definitely worth checking out just to see where third-person shooters have evolved since then. To end, I want to talk about the extra content on this collection. There's hardly any at all. Midway Arcade Treasures had DVD-like content where some games had interviews, behind-the-scenes videos, and even documents of these arcade games. Here, there's score attack for each game and where you play under strict rules to surpass set scores. But that's it, really. Overall, while solid in its own right, Midway Arcade Origins feels like a step down in content from the Treasure series before it. Worth buying to maybe one day see WB wake up with these other Midway IPs, not Mortal Kombat, but enthusiasts may want to hunt down the Treasures trilogy, which requires a Gen 6 console, but still, those are far better for the extras alone.